Raise your hand if you're awake. I'm just testing you.
Last session before lunch.
I know.
Yeah, I know. We gotta make sure. Yeah, I know. So why don't we get this thing started so that they can eat? But to get started, why don't each of you tell the audience a little bit about what your company is about and what your personal role is at your company.
Okay, so I'm Scott. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Ion Interactive. We make a software as a service platform for creating marketing apps. We originally started for very high-end landing pages and microsites. Basically any kind of digital experience in the marketing funnel. We really focus on letting marketers do amazing things in that way.
Yeah, my name is Kimberly Brinker, as they mentioned, and I work for Kabam that does really cool games. And I work on their publishing side of the business, so we publish third-party developed games. And I manage user acquisition for them, for that portfolio, web and mobile.
So why don't we start with user acquisition strategies, and then we'll go into some other metrics. So I guess it's a little bit more for you to start. What are some of the metrics that both of you guys really measure when it's trying to acquire users or acquire customers or acquire people to join your platform? What are the metrics that you're measuring and how are you measuring them?
Right, so for free-to-play games, it's especially important to be efficient in your user acquisition. So for me, in the front of the funnel, we're concerned a lot with, obviously, optimization, so click-through rates, landing page experience, which of course differs between web and mobile. And that's a handshake off to the game where we look at metrics like ARPU, 7-day retention, all of that stuff. So essentially, I'm investing a certain amount of money. And in the front of the funnel, I want to make that investment as efficient as possible. And then at the latter part of the funnel, I want to see how those users perform over time.
So yeah, I mean, more broadly, when people, how many of you have landing pages for things you're doing, right? Okay, so like landing pages, typically conversion rate is the metric that most people think of. And you can look at the funnel of, what your bounce rate is coming up to that, conversion rate down the road. That's great to start, but I think the two things we see is, the more interesting metrics for people who really dig into this is one, really getting into the segmentation, that not all clicks are created equal and sort of understanding where your hotspots are coming through that. And the other is, and some of the experiences that you guys have for this, where you get beyond just thinking about this as a page, and you start to think about these multi-step experiences, or almost even app-like experiences. Now you get all this incredible data about, how people are progressing through engagement, and map that to the segments, and yeah, things get fascinating.
Which is interesting because in a lot of our testing we've done, we've found huge lifts in sometimes adding steps, which is counterintuitive to that acquisition process. So.
Yeah, it's like Zip's law, like people have always said, fewer clicks better. Absolutely not true.
Yeah.
It's the relevancy of the click, it's the engagement that people have that actually more clicks can raise your metrics.
And maybe our industry too, it's a little more game-like sometimes if you're able to add that experience at the front of your funnel.
So I'm just curious what kind of tools you're using to measure the segmentation, to measure, the clicks. What kind of tools do you each personally really love?
Well, I'm biased. This is what our
product
does,
I know,
and it's great. But typically, even for platforms like ours, it's such a multi-party ecosystem these days that you're always layering in additional analytics packages. You're always passing this data to back-end systems. Whether it's specifically bands that their games take over from that point. But for other folks, the interplay between this and marketing automation systems and CRM systems, those tend to be pretty tight.
Right. From the front of the funnel, it depends on what advertising network we're plugged into, right? So I'm looking at click-through rates there. And oftentimes we'll have test creative campaigns that we use just for testing, and then we introduce only winners within the larger campaigns. In the middle of the funnel, we work really closely with, and what I really look for there is to have something that provides automation but has a deep enough back end for me to dig into data if I need it. Once we get past that, we use Parr as a tool for me to check out campaign performance, and we even pass creative attribution along so I can see how different creative perform over time. The reason for that is that sometimes you might have a huge lift and you might be front loading a bunch of unqualified users, so I want to make sure that they're sticking around to play the games.
So why don't we talk a little bit about maybe starting at the beginning of product lifestyle. Maybe like a significant event, especially for games, but just in general, is the launch. You know, when you're first put out that landing page, or you put out that application. What are some of the considerations and preparations that each of you does when you're, say, launching a new site or a new product, and to help it gain traction, to help your customers gain traction?
So for us, you definitely want to put your best foot forward. With that said, you're going to have to stomach a little bit of high CPIs and lower conversion rates as you figure out what's really going to resonate for a game. We do pre-testing, however, where we're looking at icons, sort of theme testing to get an idea of what's going to work. For the third-party side of the business, that can be tough because we'll have a game that may have been wildly successful in other markets, and we're trying to figure out how is this going to work in US markets. So we do quite a bit of testing there.
Yeah, I think, you know, generally for testing, you know, for initial launch, I kind of fall back on like a, you know, artificial intelligence thing like simulated annealing. It's like you want these sort of very large jumps to try and explore the landscape of like what really big ideas are going to have the most traction. And that's what A/B testing is, you know, terrific for. And then once you've sort of found a winner across that landscape, then you get into that more local optimization of, okay, now maybe we're tweaking the headlines, we're tweaking just a little bit of the, you know, copy of what the call to action is. But I think too often people, you know, from an optimization perspective, they leap right in to that micro optimization and they get stuck in a local maximum. And
it's true.
You guys have always been just so great about, you know, getting very bold with trying.
We're okay with losing tests. So for us, when we launch a game, we have wildly different concepts and themes for that reason, because even if we lean on prior learnings, which we do, oftentimes testing will tell you that that doesn't mean anything for that particular game. So we're willing to stomach that initial several weeks where we're really figuring out. And what that ends up allowing us to do is have super efficient funnels afterwards, because we're willing to be risky with it.
There's one thing I'll just add on to that, because you guys are a great example of this. Very often, you know, in marketing, like these landing page, the creation of them is just treated as something so different from the core product, and so the production value, frankly, tends to be very low. You know, I think if you look at the examples that Kabam uses, you know, in these landing experiences, I mean, these are very high production value experiences, and so people get this first impression. They actually feel like they're starting that engagement with the game, even though it's just like a landing page.
A very talented creative director will get you far. I often say my tests are only as good as our creative director because they are awesome. They look great, and oftentimes I will say that gets undervalued because it's fluffier, but you can't do much without it.
So that kind of leads to maybe a different question, which is how you organize growth and growth teams, you know? Because it's not just, say, testing, but it's also design, it's UX, it's marketing, it's all those areas. How do each of your companies organize growth or think about growth? How do you manage it, I guess?
Sure. So, you know, we have two sides. You know, our own internal team, obviously, which we're small enough now that, you know, can do that all as one marketing team. But the way we work with customers is it's usually a multi-party team. So there's like an account manager who really focuses on just understanding, you know, the match, the strategy, sort of running things at a very high velocity. You know, and they pull together a creative team and creative resources, technical teams and technical resources as necessary. So I think the key thing when you're organizing this is you're really looking for something that your cycle time can accelerate as fast as possible. Particularly, I mean, you know, again, when you're lucky to be a company like Kabam where you've got enough traffic that you have the potential to really optimize from the traffic really as quickly as you're able to respond to the ideas and the opportunities.
Right. For us, I guess to answer that question specifically, the publishing team is really made up of a lot of us that come from startups. So we scale as revenue scales and automate what makes sense to automate. What I mean by that is you essentially want to be able to calibrate up, but gaming is volatile. You will have a hit and then you might not have one. And publishing within Kabam is a startup in itself. So I would say that we certainly don't pad seats. We're pretty lean, and yet we do have tools that we plug into like Ion that allow us to scale very easily and provide automation where we need it.
So we've been talking about a lot about growth, but let's talk about what I think maybe is especially your sweet spot, which is conversions. And so growth isn't just, growth is just one aspect of the entire story. So I'm kind of curious a little bit about how do you work to, like for you, how do you work to increase conversions for your games, and for you, how do you work to increase conversions for your customers?
Sure. So again, I think it's very hard to give a general purpose answer to that, because I mean, what you want to understand is the audience. I mean, this is classic Clay Christensen milkshake marketing. What's the job? Who are these people, you know, that you're trying to reach, you know, and what excites them? And I think starting that as, you know, the foundation, how do we get the product experience or the service experience higher up into the funnel? That they actually, what they're getting is their first impression, is something that, you know, really convinces, helps signal to them that your actual product and service is going to be a good match for them. And so I think once you start with that sort of a framing, then you just get into this mode of like, okay, well, let's come up with a series of hypotheses about how we deliver that. Again, taking that approach of start with some very giant leaps of some radically different approaches, you know, see which ones of those really wins, and then get into an iteration. It's like an innovate, iterate cycle that you keep going through.
Yeah, and at Kabam, actually, when I was brought on, it was to run their conversion program, which is why I work so closely with these guys. But from a user acquisition perspective, especially for publishing, that's a value added we have that other, the focus on conversion allows you to be way more competitive, especially everybody knows mobile CPIs are increasing, so being able to have a real big handle on that is going to make you pretty valuable.
So growth in general is, you can divide it into, like, there's a lot of different levers you can pull, right? There's the marketing, there's the product side, there's press, there's all those areas. So I guess a little bit more for you, but I would love to hear answers from both of you, which is how do you divide, how do you figure out when you need to focus more on product versus the marketing versus the press? How do you manage all those different aspects?
Right, so when we introduce a title, it really depends on that title. Like I've mentioned, we have some that have been wildly successful in other markets. So if we're thinking about our marketing plan there, it might nod more towards traditional marketing. We recently partnered with YouTube to do the first playable demo on that platform, which was cool. But that made sense because the game was side-scrolling and it made sense for the product, right? Like it wouldn't make sense necessarily for everything. So yeah, it really just depends on the game. And then past that, when I look at my portfolio, I really try to benchmark all games against themselves from click-through rate to 7-day retention and 7-day ARPU. What that allows me to do is say, okay, where do I need to spend my time? Do I need to focus on the front of the funnel, middle of the funnel? Is it game side? And the game side stuff is a little trickier because you can have the most efficient funnel in the world, and if the game itself doesn't hold up, you're really going to cap yourself at what you're able to scale in terms of interesting revenue.
Yeah, I think that it's funny. I mean, well, not funny, but you know, I mean, marketing previously is just so disconnected from the core organization, and now in this environment, right, marketing is now very heart, you know, of customer relationships. But there's still things that I find, you know, we see again and again. One, if the marketers actually don't think the product or service is particularly good, typically they haven't been in a mode where they're like pushing back on that. Like, how do we actually make this better? This isn't really what our customers want. And I think you're now seeing that, you know, marketing has a lot greater say in that. But also, yeah, again, it goes back to, you know, these things. I mean, landing pages, but the same thing applies to, you know, email marketing, you know, search marketing, all these things where I don't want to insult anyone, but it feels like, you know, there's been a lot of cases where people just sort of phone it in. Yeah, okay, this is, yeah, well, we have a white paper here, yeah, we'll do this, we'll do the form and fill it out. And you've got to start thinking of those first touch points as really part of the product, service, brand experience. And again, I mean, the best way to do it is if you look at Kabam's, you know, experiences on this. I mean, you will feel like you have actually started the game. I mean,
right.
Picking characters and you're engaged in it, and it's so impressive that, you know,
it's fun. It should be fun. But I will say that anybody that's been at a gaming company knows that between marketing and the game, I call it a handshake. Sometimes it might not feel friendly, but essentially we should be working together to scale and grow. One assists the other, essentially.
Let's let's talk maybe like a specific example or two. Maybe for you, a game that you or your team really helped drive the growth on, and why that worked for you, maybe a customer, and how you guys helped really drive growth for maybe a specific customer or case study.
So yeah, for us, some of our publishing deals are cross-licensed, so we have multiple other publishers we're competing against. And what's ended up happening, partly because our conversion is so competitive, is that these other publishers will back out after we kind of enter the game. So that allows us to essentially own the market after that, which is great.
I'm curious which games where that's happened. You don't have to.
War Tune is a great example of that game, and then what that allows us to do is once they see that, and it helps get exclusives down the line. We're, I think, in the second year of our publishing business, and now moving towards an exclusive model, which is a little easier for us. But
yeah, I have to be careful I don't give away customer stats without permission on that. But I think, you know, the common thing we see across, you know, many of our customers is, again, they start with this very basic landing page, you know, sort of static content offer, because that's just become such a cliche of, you know, how we do, you know, certainly in B2B, you know, this kind of growth. And I think the thing is taking a look at that experience and asking, how do you start to surface more content directly in that, you know, that's not all gated behind a form, that you're able to start to engage people. And I think the single biggest trick that we've seen that has the most impact is to try and get self-segmentation into that experience. So that, you know, when people hate to fill out forms. They're not going to give you segmentation information by filling out a form, you know, but if you give them a set of choices, like, okay, are you interested in this, or interested in this other thing, tell us, is this your biggest challenge, or is that your biggest challenge? Like what we're doing right now with these marketing apps is we're actually creating things like assessment tools. You know, so someone lands, instead of just, oh, download this white paper, read it, and figure out for yourself how you move forward, you're like, well, engage in this, you know, interactive assessment. So people go through the assessment, you know, 5 questions, 7 questions, 1, and then, you know, it tailors at the end and gives you recommendations, and then a call to action for further stuff. Okay, 2 fascinating things about that. 1, actually more people engage, you get higher conversion rates, because it's not the typical fill out a form, get a paper. But the other thing is now you look at the data that you as a marketer have got it for that specific prospect about how they completed that assessment and how that will inform what sort of content you then follow up with, how you change your nurturing, what you're able to pass along to your sales team. That is game changing.
All right, we have time for like one last question, and I'll make it very, very, you get exactly 1 sentence. This is a question I always love asking at the end, which is one piece of parting advice for the audience.
Oh, treat that first touch point as your golden first impression opportunity.
You did in a single sentence. I have to commend you for that. Most people don't.
make conversion a priority.
Simple. All right. Help me give a round of applause to our amazing panelists.